Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell, and we're bored of it. And today we're going to be reviewing Murder on the Moon, which is a one-shot mystery escape room type game in the similar style of kind of like exit games. It's set across 3 acts, so you can choose to play it all in one session or split it across the 3. It has a recommended age of 12 and over, and just to note, we were very kindly sent this by the publisher for review.
Yeah, so this is kind of your classic escape game. You've got 3 episodes, you play through in order. You're going to be doing a lot of little puzzles. And in this one, it's very interactive. So the setting is that there's a moon base funded by a startup, and there's been a murder. And you're kind of a detective, so you're basically not there, but you're looking through all the information that the commander of the mission provides to help solve that murder. And then it kind of progresses from there. And what's quite interesting about it is that it's kind of app-driven, you could say, but you don't need an app. It's just a website link. But basically where it's almost set up like a live chat with the commander, and this is where you can ask for hints, or you input your answers, or sometimes you'll get voice recordings or videos, things like that. So it's quite immersive actually, and the story is kind of running very tightly through the puzzles and everything you're doing. Yeah, and obviously it's a one shot, but you're not destroying anything, so you could also pass it on once you've completed it. So turning to what we thought about it, overall, I think we had a good time with this. It was a very nice escape game box. I think on the whole, what we would want to praise the most is the variety of the puzzles that we were doing, and kind of how well done they were for the most part. It was always something new, moment to moment.
Yeah, I think as well the narrative and the story of it was very well done.
Yeah.
I was very engaged the entire time and really wanted to kind of solve the murder, but there was little elements of the story along the way whereby you were kind of always kept with something fresh in a way.
Yeah,
it wasn't
exactly.
just, there was always kind of like, different things to solve, which like you said, really tied in very well with the narrative. So there's the kind of puzzle escape room part, but the story itself is also very interesting. So they merge together very, very nicely to create a really fun experience.
Yeah, there was also a lot of kind of light touch humor injected into kind of the materials you get and some of the way or the story, and really appreciated that. It landed almost all the time, and I was actually very impressed by kind of how comedic they made it at times.
Sure.
It definitely added a nice element to it.
I always appreciate that.
I also thought that in general the puzzles had quite a nice level of challenge. For the most part, they were kind of very solvable but challenging at the same time. So kind of had a lot of fun figuring out what we had to do and then going through it.
Yeah.
And a kind of last highlight you could say was the interactivity with the kind of web app, if you will. Like I said in the beginning, is very immersive, and it's quite fun to kind of like be part of that, and
quite
be like novel. It'd be like a live chat, and then at some points in the later acts, you're even kind of doing little puzzles, you could say, on that as well, and they use that as kind of a way to shake things up as well.
Yeah.
So that was another highlight as well.
I think with the puzzles and the kind of challenge level, they weren't like incredibly difficult, that they weren't, on the most part, like solvable. And if you did get it wrong, there was one part that we got a little bit wrong, but we were able to kind of see that later on and then rectify it. So it's not like, again, like you said, you don't rip anything up or anything like that. So if you get something wrong, you can kind of just walk back and change it in a way. So I thought that's quite nice. So it's not, you completely mess it up if you do something wrong.
Yeah, so then kind of turning away from what was good, we did have a couple of nitpicks, you could say. I think we said most of the puzzles were kind of good and challenging, but there are definitely some acts and some puzzles that are much worse, is a bad term in this kind of thing.
Let's say.
But definitely, I think Act 3 in particular, it starts out with a puzzle, and it was, I mean, it's always going to be personal opinion, I think, but it was a bit like we kind of knew exactly what we had to do, but kind of it was a bit too removed that even though we knew what we were trying to do, I think it was a bit like a little bit nonsensical what you had to get to.
Yeah.
And it's not impossible, but it just was very strange that there'd been a level and then suddenly like you're hit in the face, and then some of the puzzles after that in Act 3 were like nothing basically. So then it felt a bit like weird in terms of balancing. I think you also had an issue with having to go out of the game.
Yeah, there was something which you just might not know. And I would say the vast majority of people might not know a clue. So essentially you kind of had to go on Google to research something, let's say.
So I thought up an analogy for this.
Obviously we can't do spoilers, so it's tricky to talk about in detail.
Essentially it would be like you have a photo and they have a picture of a car framed on their desk, and there's like a poster that says "I love Aston Martin," and you would have to like go on the internet and find the exact year, make, and model of that car to answer the question.
Yeah.
And it's not something. I mean, granted, we could have potentially missed it. I don't think we did because I don't know where that would be in the material we're given, but. You basically had to do that. So you had to go, like you say, on the internet.
Some quite niche knowledge, I would say.
Yeah.
And I just didn't like the feeling of having to research something that wasn't in the game. Like the clue was there, like you said, but we did have to go out and kind of Google it. And then, like you said, it's so immersive, and then that takes you out of it.
Yeah.
And there's no indication that you do need to Google, right? So you could spend a lot of time, we were spending a lot of time looking through everything to see if there was a clue to solve it. And eventually we said, I think we're just going to have to go on Google.
Yeah.
And wasn't clear that you might have to go out the game.
Yeah.
So maybe if it was clear at somewhere, maybe you would have to like research something by yourself, and that's one thing. But I think you wouldn't expect to have to do that.
Because it was the only time as well, which is even weirder. It's one thing if it's established.
Exactly.
And this was another small issue, but there's, on rare occasion, you had to go back and use old information. And I don't necessarily have a problem with when, mystery games or escape games do this, but I think it needs to be clear that it's being done all the time or that it needs to be done. Because sometimes if the piece you're missing is something from box 1 and it's not clear that hasn't been established, you do that.
Yeah.
It can be a little bit frustrating, and that happened like once or twice. Not to any degree that I would really complain about it, but I just think it could be a bit smoother.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, and then I think there was also, we came across some like minor little errors, like I saw some spelling errors in the app, and there was one puzzle where, again, it could just be us, but we knew what we were doing. But the way they had like written the instructions, I spent like 10 minutes after going through it, and I just couldn't reconcile what they were saying or the way they were saying it with the answer they got to. We basically got like, we knew what the answer was. It was fine. We knew how to do the puzzle, but just the way they'd phrased it didn't seem correct to me. Yeah. And I just couldn't like get it, knowing the answer kind of thing based on their calculation. So there's some minor things like that. And then there was also some idiosyncrasies, like in the first act, there's kind of voice acted statements. And then in the second act, it just goes to text, even though it's the same characters. Yeah. So it's almost like a drop in production. And then I think we've already talked about Act 3 being our least favorite. And I think one big part of that is that up till now, the kind of web app had always been just a live chat where you kind of input the answers and then had a video that you showed to everyone or something. Where in Act 3, suddenly, like I said before, it's where you started doing puzzles, and it became almost the keystone to the entire act. But it doesn't necessarily warn you that that's the case, because you could get it up on a laptop, but it doesn't really tell you to, because you start always with like a QR code. So you'd have
It's
to
usually
input
just
it
like
manually, yeah.
informational or instructional.
Yeah.
When you have to refer to your phone,
Yeah.
because it was on your phone. And to be honest, I think it was the combination, and again, it's personal experience maybe. And obviously with these sorts of games, usually when we review a game, we're playing it at least 5 times, depending on the game. But this, of course, you can only play once and have that one experience.
Yeah.
So it's a bit tricky. But in Act 3, there was the kind of ambiguous language of the puzzle, which you were trying to really figure out, plus the fact that then the puzzle was being done on your phone. It was like very centered on like you, and the other 3 of us, to be honest, we got like pretty bored because we had absolutely nothing to do.
Yeah.
And like you said, maybe we could have got it up on a laptop, but even then,
But we just like
there's
didn't
nothing else to do.
know it was going to go that way. And then there was also, for example, a mini game puzzle that came up, and it was like a very simplistic puzzle for anyone who's played video games in the last 20 years, right? And the thing is, like, again, like you said, I could have got that up on a laptop, but it doesn't need 4 people's input. It was a one person, like, half-minded job. And it just suddenly changed the concept that, it was like so central. I'm like, well, I can't really share anything for you because it's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
I mean, I can do it in the time it takes to, and that kind of, and that was kind of marred with the fact that what we would say about this, it says 1 to 4 players, and we had kind of 3.5.
Yeah.
And I have to say that at times there was not anything to do for the 3rd player.
No.
Some of the puzzles, just the way they are, they just need one person to like look at it and the other person to confirm or translate or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's not anything more for people to do. And then in some acts where you have a lot of puzzles, people can do different puzzles, but then some people are missing out on the gameplay. So highly, highly would recommend this to only play as like a couple, 2 people, maybe 3. That's okay. If you know each other well, you can get around that. But I just think that it's really best at 2 players, and I wouldn't play it with a full 4 people.
Yeah,
because you would struggle to get everyone involved.
Delegating at some point to the 0.5 player. Oh, can you just look through this and find that thing that I already knew was there? And that was it, just for something to do, but it wasn't solving anything, right? So it's that 0.5 player didn't mind doing that, but obviously if you have players who really want to get involved in the puzzles, then that's obviously not super fulfilling.
Yeah. So I think we did just say, some negative things about it, but I think overall it was a good experience. We really enjoyed it. Like I said, the story, the puzzles, the variety, enjoyed it in the moment. There's just some frustrations, and I think it's an uneven experience.
Yeah.
But they do, I guess you can always say that they throw a lot at the wall and only some of it's sticking. And maybe that's just what happens with the variety. Maybe different people will find different puzzles better or worse than we did.
Yeah.
So that's just something to consider. But the one issue I think that we come to is the list price for this on the publisher's website. I would never pay it for what this was. I think in part because it's a one-time play. The second part is components. You do get, a board and the kind of web app integration, but it's you could buy a standard board game and a half for that same price and play that thing for the next 20 years, right? And obviously as a board game reviewer, that's what we're going to come back to. I think it particularly doesn't help that it's so uneven.
Yeah.
And that we had some issues. It wasn't all roses.
And it's not something that we would recommend to play with the big group, right?
Yeah,
so it's
and
not even
it's
like,
also only 2 people we'd say to play with.
Not something we'd recommend, where you could all chip in as a big group, because then you're diminishing the experience.
Yeah.
So there's also that consideration with regards to the price, I think.
Yeah. So essentially it leaves us in, a kind of, you could say, bad position, because I wouldn't recommend it for the price it's going for, which is kind of, sad to say, but it is. And the issue is just that it's a one-shot game, and particularly because there are many great detective, kind of more board game type things, or which are cheaper, like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, the Perspective series, or even, probably like the exit rooms, sorry.
Yeah.
Which not so story driven like this. I mean, this does have a lot going for it, but they're obviously much cheaper for a similar experience. So I think if you're interested in it, if it's your thing to do these kind of things, I do recommend it. There's a lot here to like. There's a lot that's interesting. It's got a great story. But just know that I think it's very overpriced for what you get, the kind of component quality, the quality of the production. Yeah. Anything final to add?
Agree.
Well, that was our review of Murder on the Moon. And if this was helpful, please consider subscribing. If you're not already, it'd be really helpful. And with that, we would like to say goodbye, but just know you can ask us any questions. See ya.
Bye-bye.